Hello, I'm Susan, and I wanted to share a little bit about my experience with Chris K and um, and his transition from this world. And I want to do it. I want to preface it by saying that I had a very special relationship with Chris, but by no means was I the only person that had a special relationship with Chris. But after his transition, and I went back to Lawrence, Kansas, to his celebration of life, I felt a need to do this video to share about my experience in this past year with Chris and the legacy that he left with me and probably with other people as well, and how me and other people that he came in contact with are processing his transition from this world. Let me start off by saying I met Chris in 1997 when I went to Europe. I was stationed at Vicenza, Italy. I met him at the first European branch of the American Counseling Association conference that fall, and he was a big guy. It's hard to miss him. And for the next couple of years, I was sending people. He was working at that time at the ATF in Landstuhl, Germany, and I would send patients up to his treatment center, and he would communicate with me how the patients did. And I remember I was just so impressed by the feedback that I would get from the patients who went up to the ATF, even if he wasn't their primary counselor. I knew there was something special about him because I felt it, but also the patients would give that feedback back to me. And so I sought him out every time we would meet yearly at these annual conferences. And I decided at the time at a certain point I wanted to work with him. In 2005, I moved up from Vicenza up to Wiesbaden, and at that point I was close enough so every 2 weeks they had a graduation at the ATF. It's called Genesis, and so I got to travel up there to see if my patients who were graduating from that program, and I sent a lot of patients there, so I was there a lot. And so I let him know that I wanted to work there sometime, if there was an opening. In 2007, I was hired, and I got a chance to go up there, and I got a chance to work with him therapeutically in group. And so I used to tease him through the years that he was my therapeutic husband. He's my work husband, and he would call me his work wife. I worked with him until he came back from there. I don't know, a couple years before me, I came back to the States in 2018, so maybe it was 2016 he came back. But we worked daily in group, and we had a wonderful experience. I did keep in contact with him. Wasn't like weekly or anything, or even monthly, but every couple of months we would talk. And in 2021, during the pandemic, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and he was one of the first people I reached out to and let him know. And I went through June. I had my operation and had radiation in September of 2021, and I managed it really well. I had a really positive attitude about it. I wasn't going to let it defeat me. I just made a decision this wasn't going to defeat me, and so after my radiation, I was looking at. I started going to the women's professional soccer games, and I was following the national team, and they were playing in Kansas, in Kansas City in October 2021. So I called him up and said, "Hey, if I buy some tickets, will you come with me?" And he said, "Sure." So I flew in, like, I want to say maybe Wednesday. I flew in. I think the game was Thursday, and I stayed about about 5 days. I stayed with him. I met his family that Friday. Kelly, his daughter, and Bob, his son-in-law, and Evelyn, who they call Birdie, his granddaughter, and then Sebastian. And it was a great experience meeting them. And so in May of 2022, a year ago, I was getting ready to do my whirlwind year of doing all these trainings and stuff to celebrate my retirement, and I was on my way to Fiji, and Chris called me, said he needed to talk to me. I remember I was in the airport flying to this wonderful experience, and he tells me that he thought he had ALS. And I'm gonna be honest, because Chris always talked about honesty and stuff, and it was really that initial, we think you have ALS. There was a lot of information coming in his mind, and he was overwhelming, and he reached out. He probably reached out to other people as well, but it was the first time that he didn't know what to do. And Chris had an issue. He really always wanted to be in control of his life, and quality of life was really important to me. So the word suicide came up, and I just said, I really try to practice listening to Chris and honoring him that way, and be a reflection for him and a sounding board. But I just said, no, I said, does Kelly know? He hadn't told Kelly. I said, Kelly is a huge part of your life, your daughter. You need to let her know. And so I said, this is an opportunity for all the years that you gave of yourself to other people. This is an opportunity for us, for people, to help you through this process. So just wait for your definite diagnosis, and just take things, in stride, okay? Just first things first. And so we ended on a good note, and in July, he got the definite diagnosis, and again, he set up his contingencies. He always knew that that was a possibility, and part of it was it wasn't that Chris wanted to die. It's just he wanted to. He lived a wonderful life. He was 72, and he wanted to live. He wanted to have quality of life, and he didn't want to be a burden on his family. Those were the two strong principles he had. He believed in and stuff, and so he got a chance. One of the things he loved to do when he went back to the States is he went to this campathon. I can't remember exactly where it was, but it was in August, and they were at a person an AA member who had a lake on his property, and they would go and they would have meetings on the lake in an inner tube. And so he initially was like, I'm not going to go to that. And I said, why? I said, he goes, well, because I can't get up and I can't get up like I could and go to the bathroom in the tent. I said, well, you don't have to rent a tent. You don't have to rent a tent. You don't have to have a tent. You can stay in a hotel and then just participate every day. And so I found out later on that he did it. I talked to a member at his celebration of life who told me that Chris hadn't told anyone. So he showed up, limping and dragging himself, and they were like, what happened, Chris? And so he did a chance to tell them, and they helped him during that process. And that's the one thing I want to emphasize. Chris was constantly, he was a work in progress, and he continued to learn. And in the last year of his life, he really learned to be a recipient of people's love, and allowed other people to be of service to him. I continue to touch bases with him throughout the summer and the fall, and I think, looking back now, Chris made a decision. When I got breast cancer, I made a decision that this was not going to defeat me. Chris made a decision that he was going to go out as quickly as he could, that he was not going to let ALS. He did not want to linger. He did not want to put his family through a lot. But he did as much as he could to allow his family time to accept, what was happening to him, and Kelly and Bob and the other people, his son Tim and Andreas and stuff. So when Chris told Tim, I think it was sometime, I don't know exactly what it was, maybe around, I want to say around in the winter time, Tim decided he was going to come visit Chris, and I believe it was after Christmas of this year. And when he showed up, he brought Andreas with him, and Andreas is Chris's stepson, who Chris raised most of his childhood, and who Chris considered as his son as well. So the two of them came, and Tim and Chris had a really nice reconciliation, because there had been a couple of years where they did not have a lot of contact. And it was a wonderful visit. Andreas stayed for, I want to say, a week, 10 days maybe, and then he went back to Germany. That's where he lives, and Tim lives in Germany. And Tim is a nurse, so Tim made a decision. He was going to go back to Germany. He was going to put in his request that he was come back and stay with his father as long as he could, which was several months and stuff. So I believe in February of this year, he came back and stayed with Chris until Chris's transition in March. I did a Camino de Santiago in March into April, and before I departed, I had a conversation with Chris, and Chris said, he said, I'm going to be honest with you. He goes, my ALS has progressed very quickly, and I have made a decision that on the 20th of March, I'm going to stop all treatment, and I'm going to let nature take its course and transition. And I've already had a conversation. I already have, I'm going to go into palliative care. I'll have a palliative nurse. I've gotten, Kelly and I and Tim have done all of the paperwork and stuff to do this. And selfishly, my response was, can you wait till I come back from the Camino so I can come visit you one more time? But I quickly said, okay, you know, you got to do whatever you do, and I'm supportive. I'll be here, you know, in spirit, and I'll send you messages every day. I'll have conversations with you. And I did. As I was walking the Camino through Spain on my way to Santiago, I had some Zoom calls with him, and I sent him videos every day of my journey, and he watched them. Tim was there with him. Tim watched them, and I'm sure Kelly watched them as well. Just a little background. Before I left, like in this last couple months, I watched this Prime documentary called Surviving Death, and it was like 6 segments of people who have crossed over into spirits. It was about it's about mediums who have the ability to communicate. It was about how people who've passed communicate with their loved ones here. It was about people who died and came back to life, and they talked about their experience and how it changed them and stuff. So I did share with Chris, one of the conversations we had, like one of the last conversations we had, was just really, it was almost like, honey, you're going on a big trip, and what are the things you need to do to take with you? Hey, did you get a hold of so-and-so? Did you let so-and-so know you're going on this trip? And I really shared a couple people. I'm like, did you get a hold of so-and-so? Did you get a hold of so-and-so? And I contacted friends of mine that I knew loved him and said, hey, here's Chris's number. He's transitioning. He's going to be passing away of ALS. And if you want to have a conversation with him, call him now, you know. And they did. Some people took advantage of that, and it was a special opportunities for both of them, on both ends, to say their goodbyes to Chris. And I love you, and I appreciate you, and I honor you. I felt like that was super genuine and super gracious of Chris, and loving, and it was just a model of what Chris's life was about. Chris was all about service work. When I went there to visit him in 21, Chris always had people he was sponsoring. He always had lovely women that he was mentoring, who saw him as a father figure, who saw him as a grandfather figure, who saw him as an uncle figure. He always had his favorite places to eat, and one of them was this breakfast place called The Roost that he went 2 or 3 times a week. And so he had told me about it, and so when we went there, when I went to visit him, we went to The Roost like almost every day to have breakfast. And the ladies there, just when he walked in, they loved him. They had his special place for him, sitting at the bar area, and he had a special seat he liked to sit, and they all came around and said their good mornings to him, and he loved that. So he let me know right before the 20th that he was going to pass. He was going to. He told me when he goes into palliative care, the doctor said he had about 10 days. And when he told me that, I was a little bit shocked. I was like, wow, you know, how is this going to happen? And so what the only thing I understood was that they would take him all his medication, all assistance that he was having to breathe, because ALS, it affects your nerves, your body, your muscles, and everything. And there was he was in pain, and he was stoic to the end, to the very last week, and then he took a little bit of medication for his pain. But for the most part, he didn't want to be under the influence of pain medication. But what I understood was they were going to give him medication to help him relax, morphine, I believe, to help him relax, and that would, because he couldn't, he needed assistance to breathe, that would just take him into a state of a coma, and then he would just pass. And so this is what I got from Kelly, is that so many people were wanting to talk to him, wanting to be connecting with him, that when the 20th came, he was like, let's put it off a couple days, because there's still some people that are trying to get in to see me on Zoom, say their goodbyes, come by. So the family had a 21st, which was a Tuesday, they had a family dinner where Chris said his final goodbyes to his granddaughter and grandson. And what in talking to Birdie, his granddaughter, who's 12, I believe, and his son Sebastian, is that he really prepared all of them. He gave them special messages, last messages, like basically it's like, get on with your life and do the best you can in your life, and honor yourself, take care of yourself, and live your life to the fullest, And if you miss me, here's what you can do to communicate with me and stuff. And Birdie shared that at his celebration of life, of just her way of connecting with him again. That was the beautiful thing that I heard when I went to Chris's celebration of life in April. So Wednesday, the week that he transitioned, from like early in the morning to like midnight, people were coming by all day long to his house. At that point, he was in his bed, which was downstairs, his hospital bed, and a couple of the women, got up, crawled up there and curled up with him, and just gave their love to him. And he saw everyone that wanted to see him. Kelly said it was like a waiting room in his living room of people wanting to get in there. Chris had a men's group that he met with on Saturdays in a park. On the Saturday before he passed, they all came to his house and had the meeting there. The waitresses at the Roost were they were bringing food and communicating with him as well. And Wednesday evening, after everybody left, about 2 in the morning, into Thursday, they took him off all care, and he went into palliative care like 2 o'clock in the morning, Thursday morning. And he lived about a little bit over 24 hours. And the family was with him, his daughter and his son, and a palliative nurse, and his son-in-law Bob. And he went into coma very quickly, and Tim and Kelly held his hand most of that day. And at a certain point in the early morning of Friday, I believe it's Friday, the nurse said typically they hold on if the family's there. So Kelly and Tim stepped out, and Bob was there with them when Chris he went into a coma, and then they were holding his hands, talking to him, and then his vitals would go down, and then when they'd start talking or they would move, they would go back up again, almost like he was listening, he was hearing them and stuff. And so when Kelly and Tim left, he gave him some space. Bob was there with him. He passed away. I was walking the Camino, and Kelly let me know that immediately. So I sent messages out to people and let them know. And she said Chris would want me to do that. And then Kelly said she was gonna that they were gonna have his celebration of life, like I believe it was the 16th of April, and in part to give me time to come back to the States. And so I came back that Wednesday, and I had a day. And then Friday, I flew from, I'm living in Fayetteville, North Carolina. I flew to Kansas City, and Kelly picked me up on Friday. I got a chance to stay in Chris's home It was in transition. Kelly was moving all the stuff out and getting out because they had to be out of the house by the end of the month. And so I got a chance to stay at Chris's home and feel Chris's spirit. Chris, some of you guys know, he had a whole pallet still of Propel water. He was always drinking that Propel water. It's not good for you to drink it every day. And Kelly told me a little bit about his kidneys because he drank it all the time. And he had a whole bin, like a huge bin of Beanie Babies. I remember when he was always, I don't know if you know, but if you were hanging out with Chris in Lonsdale, he was always buying those Beanie Babies. And I didn't know why. I was like, Chris, why are you buying those Beanie Babies all the time? But how many Beanie Babies can your grandchildren use? She told me, Kelly told me that Chris told her that he used to drop them off at the neonatal care ward for the babies and their families and stuff. And so he still had a whole bin of them. And so I got a chance to take a couple of the really funny, cute ones with me. Chris had a lot of coffee mugs. Oh my God. All the roundups and all the AA meetings he'd been through the years, a lot of coffee mugs. So we got the idea to take the coffee mugs to his celebration of life and to let people take them. And we told them that they were there as a gift, just to take a little a memory of Chris and all his roundups through the years. And most of them were in Germany. So that was kind of cool. The people that came loved that. I spent a little bit of time with Birdie, and a little bit with Sebastian, but mostly with Birdie. And we were, one of the things experiences I had with her is that it was lightning when I was there, I think Saturday night, and we were out there watching the lightning. And she was just talking to Chris, her grandpa, up there in the sky and stuff. And she was just really open to the experience. Hey, Grandpa, are you up there? And thank you for sending the lightning. And isn't that a cool lightning bolt and stuff? They're just beautiful children. Sebastian and Birdie are just amazing. Sebastian's graduated from high school and stuff, and Chris taught him how to drive, and had just really, he made the time to have magical moments with both of them. He would take Birdie on dates, and they would go to have a meal and have ice cream and go to, her favorite thing was, she loves animals, was going to the pet store and just look at all the animals. Chris, after he left at Lonsdale, he went to Manhattan. He finished out at Kansas, at Fort Leavenworth. And then he stayed there in Manhattan, so he did a lot of service work, did a lot of meetings there, had a lot of sponsees there. And then he moved, a couple years later, he moved to Lawrence, Kansas to be closer to Kelly, because she wanted to have him more in her life and on a weekly basis and stuff. And so the celebration of life was on Sunday, and Kelly asked me to at the end of the meeting to do the Serenity Prayer. And so I did it the way we used to do it at the ATF, is we got in a really big circle, and I told everybody, look to the left, look to the right, look across the circle, and remember that you don't have to do it alone. And that was a tribute to Chris. I talked to the group about my experience with Chris, and one of our shared favorite memories was at a certain point when he and I were working together. What I noticed about Chris is he was always doing service work, and it was very rarely that he needed help or asked for help. It was almost unheard of. And he needed to go into the hospital for a procedure, and it was going to be an overnight. And I remember just thinking, this is an opportunity for me to help him. And he didn't ask for help. And so I asked at a certain point, I was just kind of, And I said, I finally cornered him and said, how are you getting home? And he hemmed and hawed and tried to change the subject. I said, no, wait a minute, stop. I said, how are you getting to the hospital and how are you getting home? And he's like, oh, well, well, I'm going to drive myself there, and I'll be fine. They won't release me until everything's okay. I'm just going to drive myself home. And I said to him, you selfish son of a bitch. And he like got shot. I said, how do you feel when you help other people? And he goes, good. I said, this is it. This is other people's opportunities to feel good by helping you. And you're taking that away from people. That's selfish. And he just started laughing, and that old Chris laugh that he had, the big gut laugh. He says, kind of sheepishly, well, can you give me a ride there to the hospital? I said, I would be happy to. And so he would often share that story with me. And I know he shared it occasionally with other people as well, because I shared that story at his celebration of life, and I had several people come up to me from that area and share, oh, you're that woman. He used to talk about you. You're Susan. He talked about you and about that lesson he had about allowing other people to help you as well. I met a woman there who worked with Chris in the prison system there. I don't remember Chris telling me that. So Chris was going into the prison system there, and there were people, AA people, that he was taking in and helping the prisoners, and I guess they have a prison somewhere close by. She had found out, she hadn't seen Chris since the pandemic started, and she'd heard that Chris had passed, so she came and she wanted to just connect with him. There were different groups of AA people. There were out-of-towners that came in as well. And so one woman shared how she was getting out of a really bad relationship, so she'd gone to the Roost, was just almost crying, and she sat next to Chris, just happenstance. And Chris told her he was a counselor, and for her to share what was going on with her. And then later on, she turns out she needed to be in recovery and started going to meetings as well. And her and Chris had a weekly date where they would meet up at the Roost and have breakfast together. He had another young lady that after his men's meeting on Saturdays, he'd meet up with her at a restaurant. They would either a restaurant or eat ice cream together and stuff. And every Saturday, that was her. She was a young woman who was studying to become a nurse, and he was always doing things, and for the most part, he did not want anybody to know. He really wasn't a person to share about that. Occasionally it would come out. He would talk about that. After the celebration of life, a group of us, most of them the out-of-towners, went back to Kelly and Bob's home, and we had the leftovers from the celebration of life. We looked at old photos of Chris, and one of them was, I don't know if most of you might have known that he grew up with Bruce Springsteen. He went to high school with him, and when that movie, that song, Glory Days, it was about the time when Chris and his friends, including oh my God, I just forgot his name. Bruce Springsteen, they were hanging out at the bar and just, playing music and drinking and stuff, and enjoying their adolescence. Okay, glory days. And there was actually a photo of Bruce Springsteen there as a teenager. I mean, he looked like he was about 14 years old, but he was probably about 16 or 17 years old there in the photos and stuff. One of the things that Chris and I talked about also was about when he transitioned, that I said to him, I said, how are you going to send me, can you send me a sign that you're over there in the spirit land and you're doing okay? He goes, yeah. He goes, I'll send a squirrel I'll come in a squirrel form. And I said, well, what are you going to do? He goes, well, I'll come to your window and I'll tap on the window of your house. And I'm like, okay. I said, but it's going to have to be a big ass squirrel. I said, I have like 5 indoor cats, I have a whole bunch of outdoor cats that I feed. That's going to have to be some squirrel, Chris, to come and let me know that you're doing okay. As soon as Chris passed, I knew he had transitioned. I just began talking to him. I have this bulldog that Chris gave me one time when he was servicing his BMW. And that's my memory of Chris, because he saw me as a bulldog, and so I have it there with my picture of my mom and my brother who passed away of cancer after I got breast cancer. And I was just filled at the celebration of life with such a feeling of love, because Chris was all about service work and the language of the heart. He navigated most of his adult life in his sobriety through his heart. He just loved. He loved people. He loved helping people. He loved listening to people. He loved being there for people. And he shared his story quite openly with people of his humanness, okay? Anything you had been through, Chris had been through something similar, and he'd had low lows and he had high highs, and most of his life, in his adult life, all the gifts that he had in his life was a result of his sobriety, So that is pretty much, I feel like that's pretty much what I wanted to share, and I feel really good having that opportunity to share that experience. So I want to share something very, very special. When he went on palliative care, there was a palliative nurse, and there was Tim and Kelly. They were going to give him some morphine to put his body out of pain, because apparently, he didn't tell me this, because he was in quite a bit of pain at the end. He leaned back, he put his he swung his hand back, he goes, okay, I'm ready for something, like I'm ready for the drugs, you know. And they just all burst out laughing, because he just went into that place of, I'm ready to transition, in the most loveliest and gracious and genuine, and the serenity prayer, where he accepted the things that he could change, that he couldn't change, and accepted the things that he could. And so with that, I love you, Chris, and I know that you would appreciate me letting the people know who loved you, who couldn't be there close to you, what those last months, the last weeks, the last days, the last minutes were. And we all are carrying a piece of Chris in our hearts. And every time we can think about him, just think about the language of the heart. He would love that. And with that, I love you all, and I wish you all would have a day to be in a beautiful state.